I just got back from seeing A Streetcar Named Desire at the Phoenix Theatre here in London's West End. I didn't manage to catch it while I was at the Almeida, unfortunately, but I secured a standing ticket just in the nick of time before it closed at the Phoenix. It's been insanely difficult to get tickets, although they have had a raffle system where you pull glow sticks out of a bag if you turn up in person, and you can potentially get tickets for that day. And I love that, and I wish more theatres were still doing that. It's become less of a thing, I think, since the pandemic, but I want to give props to the Phoenix. I don't know if they did it at the Almeida, but props to the Phoenix for keeping that going. So that's been a method of access. But aside from that, you've got tickets going in the £200 to £300 range, and that's mind-blowing. It is so absurdly inaccessible for the majority of people, and to me, as someone that's on the newer side of loving theatre and musical theatre and sort of being a part of this world, that sort of ticket price indicates in my head that the show must be better in some way. Like, this must be 5 stars across the board. This must be the cream of the crop. This must be something that I'm never going to see again. Like, that's what a £300 price tag on TodayTix or something would indicate to me. So I want to dive in today to whether the show lives up to that kind of hype. Is it 5-star perfection? Is it the definitive Streetcar Named Desire? Is such a thing even possible? And if not, where exactly does it land on the scale of things? So some preliminary information so you can judge my judgment of the show. Get ready, okay? Before going into this, I thought A Streetcar Named Desire was a book. I genuinely didn't know that it was a play. I know, shock horror, this guy's an idiot, right? But it wasn't something I studied in school. It wasn't something that I've ever seen before, and so I just went into it assuming that it was some kind of adapted text. I didn't realize. Thankfully, I met 2 really lovely girls in the standing area who are actually studying the book right now. Shout out to Lorna and Melissa, and they very kindly explained to me that no, actually, it is a play. So perhaps foolish on my part. I wasn't going into this with expectations that it was going to be a certain type of thing. I was just expecting whatever I saw to be good. So I don't think that sort of misunderstanding actually has an impact here. Just thought it was a funny anecdote. The cast of the show is pretty stacked. You've got Paul Mescal playing Stanley Kowalski, Anjana Vasan playing Stella, and Patsy Ferrin playing Blanche. And I want to kind of quickly talk about these one by one. So Anjana Vasan's portrayal of Stella is very reserved. It's quite a sort of controlled and contained portrayal, I think. And I think that's really important. It's a very vital balance to find, because you then have Blanche, who's extremely agitated, but it's because she's anxious, she's nervous, she's skittish, all those sorts of things. And then you've got Stanley, who is also very agitated, but he's ferocious and he's animalistic and inhuman almost at times. And so with these 2 balls of agitation on different ends of that spectrum, you then end up with Anjana's portrayal in the middle, kind of trying to placate Stanley in some ways and to control that beast, while also being one of the only people that knows how to tap in to Blanche's life in order to soothe her too. Stella, in doing so, kind of gives up something of herself, a lot of herself, I think. And I thought that was portrayed really well by her. Similarly, I thought Paul Mescal was great. Paul Mescal is obviously sort of the big ticket name here, I think. He's obviously very, very well known internationally, more so than anyone else in the cast. And elsewhere, he might be a bit of a heartthrob, which is going to bring more eyes to this production. But in the show itself, like I said, he is just tormenting the people around him at all times, and he's massive. I didn't realize that Paul Mescal was as jacked as he is. That dude is a unit of human. And I thought that worked really well for Stanley. Stanley is, I think, supposed to be someone that even just by looking at him, you feel intimidated by. Like, this is not someone that would subvert expectation. They're meek and mild and then they have outbursts. No, this is sort of an unknown form that's clawing at your door outside and you don't know what's trying to get into your house. Like, he's really got that bubbling viciousness to him at all times. And he's also really loud, which I think works really well for Stanley. And I'm not sure to what extent that is mirrored in other people's performances of the role, but Mescal was shouting so much in this play, and it's genuinely terrifying at times. The first time it happens, I think someone else is midway through saying something. Maybe Blanche is stumbling through just a moment of monologue, and Mescal's aggression erupts out of him. It's like he can't contain it and has no will to whatsoever either. And so these barks come out of him, and they really stagger you as an audience member. I jumped multiple times when he would randomly shout that I wouldn't be expecting. And it was stirring and it was uncomfortable. And that's exactly what I wanted from that performance. Like, as soon as I understood that that's the way the character was and where things needed to go, I could see that Mescal was executing it brilliantly. But I don't think that Mescal was like Olivier worthy in this show. I don't think that Mescal was perfect. I don't think Mescal did much that I couldn't imagine seeing being done by someone else. He did great. I don't want to detract from his portrayal, but also as the big ticket name of the show, he did everything right, but he didn't blow me away. And that's completely okay. I don't think that you have to go to every single thing with every single big name and have them blow your mind in order for your trip to have been justified by any means. But when he is the first name in the bio on every single website that's talking about the show, Paul Mescal, Mescal is crackling with energy, Paul Mescal carries the show on his back, this, that, and the other. I was sort of there like, guys, I love that we love Paul Mescal, but please, I want to give the flowers she so strongly deserves to Patsy Ferrin here, because Patsy's performance was unbelievably good. That's where I was blown away. That's where I was sort of left reeling from the most enthralling and deeply moving as well performance of this character. She is so uncannily able to bring this chaos to a set, or maybe not chaos, but this anxiousness, this completely irremovable anxiety, this skittishness, like I mentioned before. And once it's there, and once she's going, and once she's in one of her moods, the storm has arrived, you can see it on every other actor's face. You can see that she's sucking all the energy in the room up here, even if Mescal is shouting and screaming and doing all these sorts of things and being this brute in the corner. It's the reflection of that in Patsy and in Patsy's performance that I was staggered by. I thought it was so damn good. I wish I'd seen Patsy in Summer and Smoke, which was directed by Rebecca Frecknall, who also directed this. She, I believe, is the Almeida associate director. And Summer and Smoke is another Tennessee Williams play, which Frecknall's direction of got rave reviews. I think, as far as I'm aware, people said that it was one of the sort of definitive performances of that play. And so Patsy and Rebecca have history together, and I mean, she's just stunning in this production. She's so fantastic. But she, interestingly, isn't necessarily the most stereotypical casting, I think, for Blanche in Streetcar, because it's apparent as you go through the play, a very important theme in the show is Blanche's inescapable, almost humiliation about her age. And the lights are dim around her, and she is symbolically a moth in many ways around light. But then in that moment in the show where the light is sort of cranked up and her true look is exposed, I got the implication that as the audience, we might in that moment be meant to think, oh, she is a little older than we might have judged based on what we could see in the dark. That is certainly the way that, I've forgotten his name, I think it's Mitch, reacts in that moment, if I recall correctly. But Patsy looks, certainly from the standing area, I was on the Royal Circle, so I wasn't that far away, I wasn't sort of in the rafters, but she looks like she could be 25. Like, she just doesn't look anything really close to middle-aged. And I think that there's room to say, therefore, that point in the play doesn't sell the way that you might want it to. But I was talking to the girls afterwards, and I think that to some extent, it's actually completely fine. I don't think there's an issue there at all, because her humiliation as a character, and her feeling of almost guilt of being that age isn't a logical feeling. It's completely irrational, really. But regardless of whether it's true or not, Ferren successfully convinces the audience that she is afflicted by these feelings. Even if she's 25, it doesn't need to be rational. It doesn't need to be believable. There are plenty of people in the world who have complexes about things that aren't true, but they still believe them because they have a complex. And Ferren succeeds in her portrayal because she doesn't lean into actually looking like she's a little older, but rather she convinces you that she feels like she looks older, and that feeling haunts her at all times. Now, speaking of haunting, the music, or the lack of, in the show is also really haunting because it's so unbelievably sparse. And this goes for the set design as well. So Madeline Gerling did the set design at the Almeida, I believe, which transferred over to the Phoenix. It's essentially a bare room, bare brick walls, and in the center of the stage, you have a square platform with another square platform on top of it. So you essentially have a step, and then you have the main central platform, and that is the room where all of the scenes kind of take place, and the step then acts as a corridor, or as the outside, or as an off-stage area where one of the cast might sit and pass things on to the stage. So for example, when Blanche arrives, she's looking for alcohol, and one of the other cast members is sitting on that step, so one step off the floor, and they produce a bottle and they put it onto the central platform, and Blanche, who's on that platform in the room, picks it up and continues her scene. There are occasionally a few chairs, there's a cake at one moment in that central area, but other than that, it's pretty much empty. A suitcase maybe, but no walls there, certainly, and not really a lot else. For the wider set, you on the right-hand side have a metal staircase that goes up to a balcony, a little ledge, and on the center of that, and I didn't realize this at first because the overhang when you're standing doesn't make it super obvious it's there, but if you crouch down a little bit, there's a drum kit up there. It's played by Tom Penn throughout the show, and those drums alone make up the majority of the music that you get throughout the play. There are other moments. There is whistling, which is so terrifying and mournful and haunting. And there's also occasionally in moments some singing from different characters. But beyond that, it's drums. And so combined with Mescal's shouts and barks as you go through the play, you then have this drum kit doing the exact same thing. It's rumbling. It's just constantly building a layer of dissatisfaction with the world almost. You feel on edge, you feel antsy, you feel like there's something growing inside you. And occasionally, you, similar to Mescal, get just a hit of a cymbal or a hit of a drum, a bass drum, whatever it might be, and it makes you jump out of your skin because it's so abrupt and it's so sudden. And so you have Mescal's anger and brutality, which I think you really get a feel for from the drums. But similarly, the uncertainty of it all and the constant feeling of anticipation works really well in conjunction with what Ferren is doing, because she's this ball of nerves, and the drums are very much another evocation of that. And I loved this. At first, I was a little unsure, but by the end of Act 1, and certainly by the end of Act 2, I really enjoyed the fact that there was so little on the stage. There was so little that made up the set. There was so little instrumentation. There was so little to fill those haunting gaps of silence. But occasionally, it would be pierced by something so startling that I would feel just as skittish and terrified as Blanche might have been in a given moment. And so you'd have those moments, and then you'd have Patsy Ferren deliver a monologue from Blanche's point of view, which at this point I sympathize with even more because I'm feeling just as mixed up in all this as she is, and her monologues are relentless. They go on and on. She spirals in front of you, losing grip on reality in more ways than one, and by the end of them, to some extent, you're convinced. You understand exactly why she's the way she is, and you feel for the poor woman. And this happens time and time again. I think maybe on her third monologue, sometime in Act 2, she kind of got to the end of the maybe minute that she'd just spoken consistently for, rattling through all of these reasons why her world was falling apart, and someone in the audience, they couldn't help themselves, clearly, they started applauding. No one else joined in, thankfully, because she needed to keep rattling on with more monologue, but it had that effect on that person, like just being awestruck by the sheer beauty and, I can't think of the word that I'm looking for here, maybe the sort of veracity of her performance. It felt so real. And so this combination of Farron just being incredible with this stripped back set, with this extremely sparse but terrifying instrumentation with Tom on the drums, and then with Mescal pacing back and forth like an animal the entire show and terrifying the people around him and being unstoppable in doing so, is this production's way of putting you on edge and giving you that feeling of reality dissolving a little bit, I think. And this is in contrast to the last production of Streetcar that I'm aware of that was in London, I think, at the Young Vic in 2014. Certainly the large, big budget one, that starred Gillian Anderson. And in that, and I didn't see this for the record, but they had a revolving stage the entire time during the show. And so Gillian and other members of the cast have spoken about this, saying it was really disorienting at first and really difficult to get used to, and we had to acclimatize. But you can imagine, as the audience, you're watching a show, you haven't had time to acclimatize, you get there, and the world just starts spinning, and it spins the entire time. So that was a technique and a mechanism used in that instance to unsettle the audience and to make sure that they were uncomfortable while watching this complete whirlwind of discomfort unfold around them and in front of them. Whereas this time, they've chosen different devices, but they've achieved the same effect, and they've done extremely well. And while all this is going on, there is a shock moment in the set design and the way that they've staged this, where midway through, I believe it's Act 1, suddenly, a complete surprise, water starts raining down onto the stage, and it's contained specifically to the step that I mentioned before. So like I said, there was the step, and then there was the next layer up that was the main central stage, and the water falls onto the step. Presumably it's a drain sort of thing as well. And it means that Blanche in this moment is framed within her house while it's raining heavily outside, and it lasts maybe 45 seconds. It doesn't last long at all, maybe 30 seconds, but it's just enough time to transport you to a different place. And that's what you need in that moment, because Blanche is remembering a previous time. And the only other time in the entire show that it happens, it's no longer just on the step, it's in the center of the stage. And this time it's directly on top of Blanche. It's just after she's been sexually assaulted by Stanley. And the way that they did that scene, I think maybe will attract some discussion and debate from critics and audience members, because she's raped, like that is the implication there. But the way that they displayed that was that she essentially has this big flowing sort of wedding dressy style dress on. It's very floaty and fluffy, and that gets torn off her by all of the other cast members other than Stanley. And Stanley is kind of standing there in his pajamas at this point, but she's lifted up and the dress is torn off her, and then she sort of throws herself down into the center of the stage where the rain begins. And that was it. And I think that there's maybe room to not truly recognize how awful Stanley was in that moment, because there's quite a lot that you need to put together. And via some discussion with Lorna and Melissa to sort of confirm what I was and wasn't sure of, I think that you are intended to be left with the message that Stanley rapes her, but then makes everyone convinced that in actual fact, she's just gone crazy completely and this never happened. But the way that they portray it on the stage in this instance doesn't necessarily make that super obvious, because I think it leaves room for you to believe that she's being committed, she's being submitted into this support system, just because of the fact that everything else is already falling apart around her. And it isn't necessarily obvious that this is the final straw that makes that happen. The assault specifically, and the supposed fabrication of that from Stanley's perspective, him saying that she would have made it up. And I didn't have an issue with this. I thought that it was enough what they did, but I could see some audience members not getting the full picture from it there, because there's a lot to deliver in not a lot of time, but it's only really a minor gripe. So the question is, did it live up to the hype? Was it as good as a £250 ticket would make you think? And I want to split this into two very important, distinct categories. First, I loved it. I had a fantastic time. I'm so glad I was able to go. I feel so lucky to have just fortuitously managed to find a way to get a ticket last minute. It was made even better by meeting those two girls and being able to talk to them a little bit about the source material and to learn a little bit more about what was going on there, and just to witness Patsy Farron especially being pure gold. So I had a really wonderful time, and what I was seeing in front of me and all of the connections that I was able to make of understanding the theme of light in the play more and more as it went on, and trying to piece together different aspects of symbolism and trying to understand, okay, so different characters are sitting on the edge of the stage, not as characters in those moments, but almost as stagehands presenting a bottle of whiskey or whatever drink, liquor of some kind, or presenting a glass or things along those lines, and trying to understand, okay, what are the choices that have been made here to have that character be the one to present that item and not to be a character in that moment, but just to be part of the set. And trying to engage with all of that was so much fun. I just loved all of the complexity and the depth and the symbolism and how rich the text clearly was, and the fact that it was being brought to life in such a brilliant way. So that's the first distinct part of the answer. But that is not the same thing as was this production 10 out of 10, £250 worthy. And I think, I've done a lot of thinking about this, I think what's happened here is that this production isn't £250 worthy necessarily. And I know if you've seen it and you've loved it and you hate me for having a dissenting opinion here, then I'm sorry. But I think it's very, very rare that you're ever going to get into a situation where I'm sitting here saying, yes, it's worth spending 250 quid to go to the theatre for a night, because that's such an outrageously large amount of money. And this production was brilliant, but I have to question to what extent my enjoyment of it was based on the play, not on the production. I think a lot of the things that I was really getting a lot of joy from throughout were actually thanks to Tennessee Williams, the playwright, not necessarily thanks to the way that they had brought it to life in front of me. And granted, the two things are intertwined, right? The play could be written fantastically, but if the actual performance is off, then I'm not going to be engaging in trying to sort of hunt for all those clues and those symbols and those threads in that same way, because I'm not going to be able to get past other things that are barriers to that for me. A poor performance, a frustrating music choice, bad lighting, whatever it might be. So I give complete credit to the production for successfully getting out of my way and letting me tap into that source material in such a brilliant, unhindered manner. But at the same time, outside of Farron was the star of the show, hands down for me. Outside of her being wonderful, I don't know if other elements of the show could have changed, and I would have necessarily been like, that's unfortunate because that was the best decision that could have been made there. This isn't the definitive Streetcar Named Desire production for me, even not having seen other productions of it, because there wasn't a lot that I was seeing on the stage where I stood there and went, that's irreplaceable. That could never be better. That was so good that it's already a 10. Why would you want to improve a 10 out of 10? Like I said, Farron was the exception to that, and I'm a fan for life now. I will endeavor to see her in whatever she's in the future, however I possibly can. But I think what's actually happened here is the 250 quid part of things is because of Mescal. I think it's just because he's a celeb. Because I looked at a bunch of reviews and they weren't 5 stars. There's some reviews out there that are 4, actually quite a lot of 4-star reviews. So people recognize this is really good, but for £250 a ticket, I was sitting here thinking, oh, it must be the best thing since sliced bread. But apparently not. Apparently it's more so that Star Power has sold it out, and thankfully the result is still stellar. It's still brilliant, but it's not because it's a 5-star once in a lifetime work that the price is so egregious. So it's an interesting one. I loved it. I don't want to make out like I had a bad time or I have gripes with the show necessarily. I had a wonderful time, and I'm now a lifelong fan of A Streetcar Named Desire as well. Clearly, that play is something I wish I could have studied in school, but now I'm going to just sort of continue to study as I see it in my adult life in other productions in the future. So I'm a very happy customer, and being able to get a cheaper ticket as well, thanks to that last minute standing opportunity, I've got nothing really to complain about. But from an accessibility standpoint, and from a why the hell is it so expensive standpoint, those are sort of my thoughts. So based on all this, am I giving it 4 stars, or am I giving it 5, or where's it landed for me? And I think it gets into that sort of weird territory where I would, for example, give 5 stars to Jerusalem that I saw last year, because Mark Rylance's performance in that show was something that I expect to be unmatched for the rest of my life. It was must see, it was essential, it was perfection. But I don't think Ferrin quite pulled off a Rylance in this, and certainly the rest of the cast don't give me that same feeling that this is something I would never see again, that could never be seen again. So maybe for me it does land at 4, but I'm still, to be honest, trying to figure out how I think about that sort of rating system in general, and where I want things to land. Do I want things to just be 5-star over and over again? If something's really good, am I going to just default to 5? Or am I going to be a stingy guy who only gives 5-star to one show a year? Do you know what I mean? So for now, I'd say 4, but I'd say 4 with the condition that it's still brilliant, and if you got the opportunity to go, I would still strongly recommend. I think you're going to have a wonderful time. You're going to love it. But I can imagine a world where it's ever so slightly better. I just don't know what that world looks like, but I'm excited to see someone try. So thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this review, then feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.